Just a couple of days after the 2016 U.S. presidential election, a journalist, a Russian-American journalist named Masha Gessen, published what was basically an alternate concession speech for Hillary Clinton. Masha Gessen said on election night that same week in November 2016, when it became clear in the wee hours of the morning on election night that Donald Trump was going to win the presidency, Gessen argued that Clinton, instead of giving the speech that she gave, she perhaps should have just said this. And I will warn you, this is a little dark, it is a little stark, but given that she wrote this basically hours after election night, it also feels oddly prescient just a few years down the road now. So here's the alternate concession speech for Hillary Clinton as imagined by Masha Gessen. It starts, "Thank you. Thank you, my friends. Thank you. We have lost. We have lost, and this is the last day of my political career. So I will say what must be said. We are standing at the edge of the abyss. Our political system, our society, our country itself are in greater danger than at any time in the last century and a half. The president-elect has made his intentions clear, and it would be immoral to pretend otherwise. We must band together right now to defend the laws, the institutions, and the ideals on which our country is based." That's not what Hillary Clinton said on election night, but the week of the 2016 election, journalist Masha Gessen, who had spent most of her life in Russia and much of her journalistic career writing about the rise of Vladimir Putin in Russia, she said that or something like that is what Hillary Clinton should have said in the early morning hours of Wednesday, that first week in November when the election results came in. That article by Masha Gessen I think, is still seen as a landmark these 3+ years later. That article is remembered less for that alternate proposed concession speech for Hillary Clinton, calling on the country in that moment to band together to defend our laws and institutions. It's remembered less for that than it is for the set of rules that Masha Gessen went on to lay out for how to survive and preserve your sanity in a country that is shedding its democratic foundations and is shedding the strictures of the rule of law. Rule number 1, first on her list of rules, was the most memorable one, this one that still wakes me up regularly to this day. Rule number 1, quote, "Believe the autocrat. He means what he says. Whenever you find yourself thinking or hear others claiming that he's exaggerating, that's our innate tendency to reach for a rationalization." As an example, Masha Gessen provides this, quote, "Trump has received the support he needed to win and the adulation he craves precisely because of his outrageous threats. Trump rally crowds have chanted, 'Lock her up.' They and he meant every word." Well, fair enough. That is, in fact, the world that we have ended up living in over these past 3.5 years. But over the last 48 hours, as the Justice Department has been thrown into crisis and chaos, and for the first time, we are starting to get resignations on principle from career Justice Department personnel who cannot abide what's being done to the justice system by this president. Over these last 48 hours, rule number 3 for Masha Gessen is sticking with me as well. Quote, "Rule number 3, institutions will not save you. It took Putin a year to take over the Russian media and 4 years to dismantle its electoral system. The Russian judiciary collapsed unnoticed. The capture of institutions in Turkey has been carried out even faster by a man once celebrated as the Democrat to lead Turkey into the European Union. Poland has, in less than a year, undone half the accomplishments of a quarter century in building a constitutional democracy. Of course, the United States has much stronger institutions than Germany did in the 1930s or Russia does today. The problem, however, is that many of these U.S. institutions are enshrined in political culture rather than in law. And all of them depend on the good faith of all actors to fulfill their purpose and uphold the Constitution. Institutions will not save you. They depend on the good faith of the actors within them. Boy, are we living that. So that was Masha Gessen just a couple days after the 2016 election. Not long thereafter, Timothy Snyder's book on tyranny was published shortly after the inauguration. And it followed a similar line of logic, looking at lessons from the collapse of various democracies across Europe over the course of the 20th century, to learn lessons for us, to learn lessons for how to protect our democracy and how to know if we're losing that fight to protect our democracy and what we should do then. Snyder, quote, "The European history of the 20th century shows us that societies can break, democracies can fall, ethics can collapse, and ordinary men can find themselves standing over death pits with guns in their hands." We might be tempted to think that our democratic heritage automatically protects us from such threats. This is a misguided reflex. Americans today are no wiser than the Europeans who saw democracy yield to fascism, Nazism, or communism in the 20th century. Our one advantage is that we might learn from their experience. Now is a good time to do so. And he published this book right at the time of the inauguration of Donald Trump. And then the book, very short book, goes on to lay out 20 lessons from the 20th century for Americans to consider today. And some of these lessons, some of these rules keep me up too. For example, rule number 1 from Timothy Snyder: do not obey in advance. Most of the power of authoritarianism is freely given. In times like these, individuals think ahead about what a more repressive government will want and then offer themselves without being asked. A citizen who adapts this way is teaching power what it can do. I would amend that in our time to say a senator who adapts in this way is effectively teaching power what it can do. There's also rule number 8, which is stand out. Quote, someone has to. It's easy to follow along. It can feel strange to do or say something different, but without that unease, there is no freedom. The moment you set an example, the spell of the status quo is broken and others will follow. Is that true? Here's the one that is sticking with me right now, given what is going on at the Justice Department and the sort of crisis that we have been thrown into in terms of the rule of law in this country over the past 48 hours. It's Snyder's rule number 2. Quote, defend institutions. It is institutions that help us to preserve decency. They need our help as well. Do not speak of our institutions unless you make them yours by acting on their behalf. Institutions do not protect themselves. They fall one after another unless each is defended from the beginning. So choose an institution you care about, a court, a newspaper, a law, a labor union, and take its side. So that's interesting, right? We get this one prescient warning from the Russian-American journalist: institutions will not save you. They will fail. Do not count on them to save you. We get another warning from the eminent historian of 20th century collapse of democratic and rule of law countries. He says, yeah, institutions are important, but institutions do collapse unless each one of us actively defends and saves them from the kinds of pressures they're about to come under.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.